The power of risk. I don't think anybody in here could deny that there's one thing that keeps you guys from doing everything that you want to do. Me too, right? Whether it's chasing your dreams, whether it's reaching your full potential, there's one word that keeps you from doing it, and it's called fear. It's this word fear that keeps us from not quitting that job and committing to real estate. It's that word fear, but when you start thinking about fear and you backtrack it, you think to yourself, there must be a foundation of risk. See, if there was no risk involved, why would you fear it? And risk is like a bad word, right? Like you actually, when somebody says, hey, that's risky or risk, like you feel something in your body, you start fearing just by hearing the word. And I think the word might get a bad rap. I think we're misdefining this word. And I know that we've been programmed because I asked ChatGPT to do this title slide. So when I asked ChatGPT to do a title slide called The Power of Risk, this is what it came up with first. I was like, can you make it less end of days? Can you brighten this up a bit? Like, so even ChatGPT knows it's a scary word, and I don't blame you, because this is how the dictionary helps us. The possibility that something bad, unpleasant, or unexpected may happen. Who wants that? Who wants that? Maybe I could change your mind about this word, okay? So there was this young man, and he was doing really well. He was an entrepreneur in his 20s. He was making money, and he had an opportunity to kind of shift his business and do something totally different. And he just thought that this could be a risk worth taking. So he ended up putting all his money, racking up credit lines to make this thing happen. And you know what? He lost everything. He lost everything. Everything he had built in his 20s. He lost his confidence. But there was one thing when he sat in this room with this one mattress in his dad's apartment that he was scared most about losing, and it was his courage to risk. Because without risk, there is no reward. Right, and he knew from every success book he had ever written that the one thing he couldn't lose was his courage to risk, even though he just took a really, really big L. So he starts working his way back up, ends up actually going into real estate. And he starts kind of building his business back up a little bit. Little by little, he starts putting some money in the bank, getting to like a kind of comfortable place again. You know, went from surviving plus, and then to start thriving a little bit. And he was starting to feel like, man, I'm finally getting to a point where I can breathe again, right? And then he meets this guy. And he meets this guy, and they had a lot in common, so they thought to themselves, man, there could be some kind of partnership here, but this guy was kind of a risk taker, and that was the reason it was attracted to the young man. The young man was like, man, he's a risk taker. This could be the type of person that could keep him from losing his courage to risk. Because have you ever done that? Have you ever partnered up with somebody who's just kind of a gunslinger? And you almost do it to save yourself from being too conservative, right? And that's what had happened here. So sure enough, they start talking, and the first opportunity to risk comes up. So this risk taker guy comes up to the young man and says, hey, listen, there's an opportunity for us to take a risk on an investment property. Thinking about risking again made him a little bit fearful, but it wasn't too scary a risk. You know, there's levels to this, right? So there was this $140,000 quadplex property, and he said, look, we can invest in this. And the young man thought to himself, man, I just got comfortable again, and now I'm going to have to put money out of my pocket to risk something again. But to be quite honest with you, it was a stretch, but it was something where he thought to himself, listen, we both split the down payment. It can't be that bad. You lose some money. You live to play another day. But then in that same day, he says, scratch that. I think we should buy this $1.4 million property. And this is even more risky than it looks, right? Not only is it 10x the price, but it was moving asset classes, which is like playing two different sports. We were going from a residential property to a commercial property, and it was 10x the price. And now I thought, there's no way that this young man's going to take that kind of risk. But something happened where he realized this could be that moment, right? That moment that if this decision doesn't get made, you could fall back into being the kind of person that doesn't take risks anymore. It was one of those all-in moments. And if you know the story, these two guys actually put this under contract without having the money. It was a borrowed proof of funds, and there was a 3 or 4 month journey of faith where literally at the very end, when these guys were ready to lose it all, God brings an investor and swoops these guys up, and they're able to buy this property. Aww. And they bought this property, and in 6 years, that $1.4 million property was sold for $4.1 million. I want to tell you that this isn't a story. This isn't a... So you might think this is a story about two guys who risked it all and won, but it's not. This is a story of risk. Okay? See, we talk about risk in a weird way, right? We always say it's risk versus reward, right? It's the bad stuff versus the good stuff. And they're two separate things. They're not the same. They're battling each other in this risk versus reward battle. And I've told that story about 100 times. And this is the first time when I was putting this presentation together that I realized that that wasn't the lesson of the story at all. See, if you look at that story, the real lesson was that 2 times in that story, I figured out I was in an all-in moment. If you guys don't know poker, all in means you take all you feel so strongly about your position. You feel so strongly about the hand that you have or your position in the game that you decide, I'm going to put all my chips into the middle of the table and I'm going to risk everything on this one hand. And twice in that story, I did that. And you have to have courage to risk. Okay? The other part is about the loss. See, there's a lot more power in the loss than there is in the win. Few players recall big pots they have won, strange as it seems, but every player can remember with remarkable accuracy the outstanding tough beats of his career. Now, the reality is that the big lesson of that story wasn't that we eventually won. It was about who I became after I lost. Who do you become after you take an L? That will be what defines you. So maybe it's not risk versus reward. Maybe we've been looking at this all wrong. Maybe, and just maybe, risk is the reward.
You better preach, bro.
Maybe risk is the reward. Who do we become after we decide to take risks? This is why I'm fascinated with investors. Investors are masters of risk. It doesn't mean that investors win all the time. That's not why. They just have a certain way of looking at life. It's a superpower, I believe. Investors are masters of risk. You see, investors thrive in storms. See, when storms come, everybody else runs for cover. And investors, well, they dance in the rain. They know all the big opportunity comes when things get hard. They knew that volatility is how wealth is built. And while everybody runs for cover, they go dance in the rain. Matter of fact, as you know, I'm the more conservative one of this duo, right? But it wasn't a secret that the market was going to get tough, and the market did get tough. Me and Gil kind of play a different ball game because we're running the business versus just focusing on our own production, right? But I can tell you the conservative partner was the first one to tell this guy, when it gets tough, the one thing we can't do is stop what we're doing. We have to keep our foot on the gas. We have to. Because the first implication was, let's cut expenses. Things got to get cut. That could be a rally. That could be the summer sizzle. That could be the winter magic. All these things cost thousands of dollars. Technically unnecessary, but an investment worth making in the storm. Especially when people are looking for the light in the darkness. Which is why we're also not only going to go into a bull market in real estate, we're going to go into a bull market in recruiting. Okay. We're going to start a trek. I'm going to tell you right now, we could talk about prices and we could talk about real estate, but in the next 24 months, you watch what happens. You watch what happens with the alliance. You watch how many people are like, you know what? This is the group I'm tying my hitch to. Right. This is the group. Okay?
Energy.
Amen. Amen. The second thing, superpower that investors have is they see invisible value. Let me give you an example. Right? You pull up to a house, there's a hole in the roof, there's termites, there's all that stuff. The traditional buyer says, keep on driving. The investor says, stop the car right here. Hold on, stop the car right here. Because the investor could see value where other people can't see value. Matter of fact, the other day, we had an agent, one of the people, I think it was you, Jen. She's like, I stepped into the office the other day, and it was like, there was nobody there. It was like, all the lights were out, and it was just Deontay there. And I was like, we need to get the energy like this back into our office again. Because there's invisible value in this. You don't know it yet, but this is the stuff that makes legends. When I first joined this company, actually it was Jen who recruited me to join Exit Realty years ago. And the story is true. I walked in, And that I wasn't even trying to sign up for a brokerage. I was meeting with her about something totally else. The next day I was signing up because I knew I needed to go all in on this. There was something I felt in that office, in that culture center, in that hub. There was an energy there, and I knew there was value to it. Ask Marissa if you ever talk to her again. I didn't even ask what the splits were. I didn't ask no questions. I was like, God's calling me here. It's an all-in moment. This is where I'm signing up. This is where I'm going to be. And finally, investors understand the power of risk, right? They understand that there's value in just risking. There's even more value in these moments in time when you have to go all in. So let me give you an example of a story. There's a company in the 60s that was began called Blue Ribbon Sports. Blue Ribbon Sports was started by a track coach and one of his runners, right? They had this idea. And as you know, when you start a business, it's the riskiest time. Right? You're just starting with an idea and you're hoping that it works. So these guys built, they wanted to build a better running shoe, so they started building the shoe. They start selling the shoe out of the trunk of their car because that's what entrepreneurs do. They do whatever they got to do to get to the next spot that they got to get to. And they start selling the shoe, and it starts selling a little bit more. They get a manufacturer overseas, things start to build, they rebrand the company, right? And then finally, and what happens with taking a risk is kind of funny, and it's happening right now with the Alliance, and I just mentioned it, is when you take a risk and you start in a business and you stick with it, you have the opportunity to catch something called a wave. You got the opportunity to catch a movement. And in the 70s and 80s, there was a movement in the United States where everybody wanted to run. Everybody started running. I have pictures of my mom and dad running marathons, and they're not marathon runners. You know what I'm talking about. Did you watch Forrest Gump? I was running. Everybody was running. Everybody was running. And you know what? They caught the wave, and everybody needed a great running shoe, and these guys came up, right? But, they were doing well. They were leading in the running shoe, but they wanted to get into the basketball shoe industry. And they had started, but they weren't doing very well. Matter of fact, they were thinking about shutting down the basketball division because it just wasn't selling enough, right? But they hire a risk taker. His name was Sonny. And they hire this risk taker to say, hey, we need to get this division going, right? So Sonny says, well, you got to give me more money. Like, we're competing against all these big basketball shoe brands who are attracting all these players to endorse them, and we don't have the money. They're like, sorry, we only got $250,000. And he's like, dang it. He's like, and here's what we want you to do. We want you to play it safe. That's what they told him. Spread the $250 amongst 3 sort of good players, and let's hope good things happen. And he's like, no, there will be no breakthrough unless you take a big risk. And there was this player he had on his mind that he couldn't get out of his mind. He couldn't get this player out of his mind. He's watching the film on this guy. He sees this guy as a freshman, hits a game-winning shot to win the college championships. And he keeps watching this videotape of this kid hitting this shot, and he realizes after watching it 100 times that he was watching it wrong. See, the play that won that game was made by that 18-year-old freshman, and they thought it was an accident. They thought the play was probably supposed to go to the main player, the veteran player on that team, and then he got covered, and he happened to throw it to the 18-year-old kid in the corner. But he watched the play again and realized, no, that's not what happened. They called that play for the 18-year-old freshman. And it was a crazy risk to take because this was the 4th time this coach had gone to the championship, and he had lost the previous 3 times. And he bet everything, not on his star player, but on this new kid who was 18 years old to hit the game-winning shot, and he hit the game-winning shot. So Sonny at this shoe company comes to the people and says, this is the guy we need. We're not spending it on 3 mediocre players. We need to spend it on this player. And they're like, no way. That's too big of a risk. That's too big of a risk. But Sonny knew it was an all-in moment. And so without asking permission, he went and talked to the parents of this kid and convinced them to go check out this company, right? And they finally got this kid to the table, and this is how they got him. They said, listen, we know these other companies are going to match you as far as the money is concerned, but we're going to do something totally different that's never been done. We're going to build the brand around you. All these other companies are asking you to bring your star power to build their brand. We're going to build a product around you. And that product was the Air Jordan. The Air Jordan. They built the product around him. And one of the reasons that they didn't want to take the risk on this was because they never thought that people would wear basketball shoes outside of basketball. They would wear running shoes to the store, but they wouldn't wear basketball shoes outside of basketball, would they? The best that they ever did selling a running shoe, was $3 million in 1 year. The Air Jordan in its first year sold $162 million. See, that's a bet worth taking. Now, guys, I haven't ruined the movie for you in a long time, but I just did. The movie is called Air. It's still worth watching, but I love the title, Air, A Story of Greatness. It should be called Air, though, A Story of Risk. It was a story of risk. So I'll leave you with this. There are 66 books in the Bible, and only 2 of them are named after women. Only 2. And one of those women I'm going to call the Queen of Risk. Her name is Esther. Okay? So Esther was a Jewish orphan, and her cousin decided to raise her. She was an orphan. He took her in and raised her. Now, Jews were living amongst the Persians at the time. They were in exile. They were being persecuted. It was not cool to be a Jew in this area. You were not living a great life, right? But something crazy happened, right? The king's wife, the queen, disobeys him, and he decides that she can't be queen anymore. And now they're going to go around the town and find all the beautiful women, all the beautiful virgins, and he's going to pick who the next queen is going to be in the town. So Esther happens to be in the group, and Esther happens to win this queen lottery, right? She becomes the queen. So she goes from being this poor Jewish girl, and by the way, she can't tell him that she's Jewish. That's a secret, right? And she becomes queen. So now it's like, oh my gosh, we just went from ashy to classy. Oh my gosh, like we Mama, we made it. We made it. But then something else happens, right? Because the second in command in the government is this guy, and he's kind of an a-hole, and he's super arrogant, and he believes himself to be like a god. And in a place full of Jewish people, he decides he wants to make them all bow to him. They must all bow to him because he's like a god. And you know, most everybody does because they don't want to get killed, right? Except one guy, and it was Esther's cousin. He said, no, you're not going to get me to bow to you, right? I'll risk my life, but I won't risk my soul. Amen. So, you know, this guy gets pissed. This guy's really mad. And he doesn't just want to punish Esther's cousin. He's going to punish all Jews. He's going to kill them all. So he goes to the king, he does a decree, everybody going to get killed, right? And so now the cousin's nervous. He doesn't want all these people to get killed because of him. So he sends word to his cousin, the queen, says, hey, you got to stop this, right? You got the power to stop this. And she's like, cuz, like, you're killing me. I just became queen like 30 days ago, right? And number one is you're going to ask me to expose myself as a Jew, which nobody knows. And number two is you're having me go to the king, and there was a law that you couldn't just approach the king. And if you did, like unasked, you would get killed. Like she had to risk her life in order to save these people. And she basically said, cuz, like, I think you're asking a lot of me, right? I just received all these blessings, right? And something the cousin said shook her. He responded to her. He said, hey, maybe you became a queen for a time just like this. Maybe that's the reason you're in the position that you're in, right? Here's the lesson, guys. They don't write books and they don't write movies about people who risk little. There's an Air Jordan waiting out there for all of you. But as Sonny said in the movie, a shoe is just a shoe until somebody steps into it. So the only question you need to ask yourself is it time to fly?